Hello, friends. Hi. Today we're going to be talking about my sort of developing theory as to why I think a lot of men err more of the avoidant attachment. And we're going to be talking about attachment in regards to friendship, as attachment theory is talked a lot about in romantic relationships, but I want to hone in on friendships because that's another area that the attachment community hasn't necessarily talked about too often, unless you're talking about works like Marissa Franco and other people. Now, we're talking about attachment. My theory, and this, please don't quote me on this, as I have not received my bachelor's or my master's yet in counseling psychology, so please don't quote me. My thoughts and theories mostly developed by the works of Heidi Priebe and her work. Please go check out her YouTube channel. She has a great channel, and I'll leave links in the description. My thoughts are mostly centered around that a lot of men err more of the avoidant or fearful avoidant attachment when it comes to developing friendships, whether it be friendships in adolescence or friendships in adulthood. And this is because that um, young men and boys are socialized to develop a sense of self-sufficiency. Now, self-sufficiency is very healthy. I think we should all have autonomy and a sense of self-sufficiency in our relationships. However, the way that men are socialized, we're socialized away from developing a sense of need in friendship. And what I mean that by that is men are socialized to become so self-sufficient that we rely solely on ourselves to meet our needs. And then we develop a narrative that other people can't meet my need of connection, or I can only meet that need. Whereas for me, it was a lot of, that was kind of my avoidance side, was being self-sufficient and not asking for help. That's an example of what I'm talking about, to put it in common terms. What I'm generally saying is that a lot of men were raised to develop a sense of to develop a lone wolf persona. You know, you're going to develop life on an island and by yourself, meaning that you don't really register that you have a human need for a connection because you've been so trained and socialized away from that. When we're trained from when we're children, all the way up until, adolescence, when we're trained and told, and also told by whether by peers or mentors or people around us or our caregivers that we are not in need of a sense of connection. We're just not, that need is not going to register to us when we're in adulthood. So it's going to be a lot more difficult for men that err more of the avoidance to develop those close, intimate friendships. And I know most of the stuff that I'm talking about today hasn't really been totally studied in psychology, but I think it's relevant enough to explore or at least talk about. Because I sense from my experience, and I'm sure other people can relate, that a lot of men do tend to lean more of the avoidance. Yeah. Now, this isn't like I have not studied this, but this is just my consensus. And this is because of how men have been socialized. This isn't to say that all men are avoidant. I've met a few men that do lean more the anxious, myself included, but a lot of the men do err to the avoidant side and lean more towards that way. So that self-sufficiency gets validated constantly throughout our years, whether it be as children or whether it's in navigating adolescence, that sense of self-sufficiency that I shouldn't ask for help or I shouldn't ask people to be with me or be there for me. That's mostly developed in that time frame. So that when we're adults, we kind of don't necessarily have the skills that other people have when it comes to developing intimacy and friendships. And intimacy is a core component of developing friendships. I feel like that is sort of forgotten in Western culture, but that is a core component of developing friendships and navigating friendships. We want to have that sense of I know you and you know me. We both are on a level of connection and getting to know one another. and we're both developing a sense of authenticity in our attachment relating. This isn't to say that this is easy, given that most of us have been avoidant, but if you are developing a sense of self-awareness about your attachment or how you relate with other people, then that can help you see that the style of relating isn't necessarily useful. Now, this is because a lot of us lack accurate mirrors to help us understand ourselves better. The mirrors that maybe that we've been given, whether it be through childhood or through adolescence, have been mostly self-sufficiency. And by that, I mean that to get your needs as a child, you develop a sense of self-sufficiency to prove to your caregivers that you don't have any needs, or you weren't necessarily allowed to have needs in a sense. This isn't like talking bad about parents. This is talking about the culture in which you grew up in your family of origin system. So that system that you grew up in didn't necessarily allow you to develop those authentic needs. And everybody has different authentic needs. We have basic core needs, to be seen and understood, and also to be listened to and heard. But everybody also has their different needs, varying different needs for who they are. But you weren't necessarily allowed to develop your awareness of your needs because, maybe your parental figure didn't really register that to you, or they might have been preoccupied with something else. This isn't to say that they are bad people, but it is to say that it didn't allow you to develop an awareness to your needs, or to develop that self-concept. Our self-concept is developed by the people that are around us. From the moment that we're born until we still develop our self-concept as adults by who we surround ourselves by. And that's something that we tend to forget, especially as men, since we are told that self-sufficiency is a priority. But I think we might need to be challenging ourselves. If self-sufficiency is creating like a sense of, loneliness and isolation, then we might need to be challenging those narratives. Again, this isn't saying like a sense of having autonomy and self-sufficiency is wrong, but if it's completely out of balance with a need for community and connection, then that becomes a problem. From what I've researched on attachment, and I've just been getting so much into Heidi Pruitt's content and Marissa Franco's content, and also John Bradshaw's content on shame and how that develops over the lifespan. I think it's quite interesting how all those sort of intersect to create our sense of identity and our sense of self. If we grew up with a sense of an inherent toxic shame-based self, which I think a lot of people, especially that are avoidant, are not even aware of. Most people are not like conscious of the fact that they are having a shame-based self, but their actions sort of show that in their behavior. And this could be in a number of ways, whether it be like through compulsive behaviors or addictions, or just, unhealthy styles of relating to people. There's a lot of ways that toxic shame shows up. It's not just like mindset, it's also how you show up in your relationships, or how you, feel about yourself. And of course, as we talk about on the podcast a lot, it does go into mental health issues like depression and anxiety. Let's not forget that. But yeah, I definitely see that in a lot of men. This idea that if I ask people for what I really need, that it's like a sense of discomfort. We're not like allowing ourselves the discomfort of allowing other people to um, be there for us, or we're not like sharing our hearts to people. And this is another theory that I have, is that growing up, that because that sense of self-sufficiency was validated by our primary caregivers, and also like the male figure, like maybe your father or your granddad or whomever, that sense of self-sufficiency was validated and they praise you for that, of course you're not going to want to give that up in adulthood. You're not going to want to just become vulnerable, or you're not going to want to need other people, because that sense of self-sufficiency was developed since you were very young, and that was validated. So if we're rewarded that and we're conditioned to be that way, then once we're not gonna necessarily have the skill set and tools to develop healthy friendships where both people are in need of each other, but there's a balance of autonomy. I think when we talk about needing other people, we're afraid of codependency, but codependency is a whole different thing that I've talked about in the podcast, but I'm definitely going to talk about in future episodes. There are other ways that men can develop an avoidant attachment. Whether there's a lot of traumas that we do go through that we're not necessarily internalizing and healing with in therapy. That could be there's a lot of like need traumas that could be like bullying or rejection or growing up in a toxic shame-based system. And when that happens, then you're kind of become disconnected from the authentic self and develop a false self. Again, this is not conscious, but this is develops over time by patterns that are validated by what you're around. So it's not until that as adults that we have the opportunity to have other people mirror our need. For example, when my first year of college, I had Alex, someone who I dearly love and someone who means a lot to me. At first, he had to mirror my need for other people and allowing other people into my own life. So this isn't to say that I was in the isolation box before, but the way that I was operating didn't allow people to necessarily get close to me and develop healthy intimacy in a male friendship. I think that experience of meeting him, because I didn't really necessarily have the mirrors growing up to mirror my need to be known on a deeper level. And after I met him, then that's when I realized that the way that I operated was just not healthy or not sustainable to develop a long-term friendship. And as I said in my previous videos, your attachment style is not a life sentence. You can change your attachment style. It does take time. What I always recommend is therapy and seeing therapists so that they can help develop a healthy mirror for you of where your default setting is so that you can be more conscious of it when you're trying to develop authentic friendships and trying to relate to other people because we all want to have friendships. I think there's a myth out there that men, because there's men can be quite more lonely than women, that men don't want friendships. I think that's a myth. Men do want friendships. It's just that some of those narratives that we've held, those deeply held beliefs that we've held for all of our lives, like the belief of self-sufficiency, can sometimes get in the way of developing that intimacy. And the way to do that is through friendship and through developing healthy mirrors, finding healthier mirrors that mirror who you truly are at your authentic self and that can challenge your way of relating. And that happened to me my freshman year of college when my friend Alex kind of forced help on me, and I was able to, over time, develop a more secure attachment base. Because before, I was operating from what John Bradshaw calls as a toxic shame identity, where you inherently believe, though not consciously, you inherently believe that you are not worth connection. And that is not true for anybody. So I hope you enjoyed my video. I'm excited to do more videos like this. I think it's quite useful. It's also quite educational. But again, this is just a disclaimer. This isn't based on any, you know, studies, but this is based on the research that I've done, and that's quite limited. I do recommend, you know, checking out Heidi Prieb's work. I think it's quite interesting of how she really nails down the different attachment styles. And I'm also really combining attachment theory and the study of friendship together so that we can understand each other more and understand ourselves better. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.